Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We still have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We have a great thinker and great friend of the show, Adolph Reed Jr., to talk about where the left goes from here after, the not great primary results last night for Bernie Sanders. So what is the next move for progressives? We have an expert on Spanish flu to talk about what happened then, what we can learn from it for the current era. And we also have a representative from the Trump campaign, Tim Murtaugh. We've had him on before. Always interesting to get his insights. And of course, the big news, Saagar, that I know everyone cares a lot about is I now have a decent mic. So you're welcome.
There you go.
We're figuring this thing out day to day.
I felt bad for you looking in those comments yesterday. But
brutal.
All right, Krystal, let's start off with, I think, the election results last night. It is worth going into some of the data. But I mean, again, and this is something Ryan Grimm, I thought, excellently brought up yesterday, which is that the results are so skewed because of what's happening with coronavirus. So we know that in Illinois, the turnout was actually 75% of about what it was in 2016 levels. Of course, you can adjust for Republican, et cetera, but that's still actually, so it sounds low, but it's actually quite high if we think about it with all these mitigating factors and the coronavirus in particular. A lot of people still came out to vote. And, that is a public health crisis. We're seeing the same thing in Florida. No, it's terrible. I mean, we saw the same thing happen in Florida. I'm not exactly sure what the turnout numbers there were. And then in Arizona, actually, the one state that has large vote by mail and also an elderly population, turnout was up by 7%. So pretty remarkable results all around. Of course, Joe Biden winning all three contests pretty handily. We're still waiting to see what the exact percentage counts that Bernie Sanders will hit in those states. But I believe at this point, Joe Biden needs to win about 40% of the remaining delegates in order to win the Democratic nomination, while Sanders would have to win 61%. So significantly back at this point. And a lot of cable news, mainstream, effectively saying it was probably the end of any realistic result he ever had at being the Democratic nominee last night.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, we can throw the delegate math up to see the lead that Joe Biden has taken, which is fairly significant at this point. And the way that this works with it being proportional delegate allocation, once you get to a pretty sizable lead in that delegate count, it becomes very, very challenging to make that up. I mean, look, you and I both covered the debate on Sunday was kind of the last gasp hope to really shake up the dynamics in the race. That obviously didn't happen. And so now, we are where we are. And I'm sure that Senator Sanders and his campaign are sort of assessing what the path is forward. And, I think it's important just to look at the bigger picture element, because I know for a lot of Sanders supporters, obviously it's very disappointing where the things have ended up here, and with Joe Biden looking very much like he's going to be the Democratic nominee. And that is a real blow to the movement, and we can't deny that. But I think we also have to remember just how astonishing it is what Bernie Sanders has been able to put on the table, the way that he's been able to shape the conversation. I mean, this entire primary was framed around his signature policy issue of Medicare for all. That is now a commonly held view. It has overwhelming majority support with Democratic voters. We are much further along to getting single payer health care than we were before Bernie Sanders started running back in 2016. That's a remarkable movement. $15 an hour, even Joe Biden has come out and embraced that now. That is remarkable. Green New Deal, which was really put forward by the Sunrise Movement, by these young organizers, but embraced by Bernie Sanders and pushed forward by him. That is also now a mainstream part of the conversation that Joe Biden pays lip service to, even though he doesn't really support its aims and goals. But you and I both know how important shifting the Overton window is. That is the essential phase one. That's what Bernie Sanders, as a kind of prophet, has been able to achieve. And now it's up to the next leaders of the movement to translate that into real power. And that's where the next phase, I think, really comes in.
Yeah, I think Sanders, for his benefit and to his detriment, was always a lot more of an ideologue than he was a real politician. And I don't mean by the politician out there on the stump. I think he was always a pretty decent campaigner. But in terms of what we've talked about so many times on the show, what went wrong, etc. He's always been an Overton window idea pusher, kind of a litmus test setter within the United States Senate. And from an ideological victory point of view, there's no question that he has owned significant space now in the Democratic Party. The question for me as an outside observer is what I'm looking at is to see how Biden treats the Sanders movement throughout this, because I suspect that his instincts are completely wrong. And this is what we've talked about a couple of times, is when he embraces the free college plan, he embraces the Pete Buttigieg level plan. And so I looked at that and I just said, oh, well, it's very clear that he doesn't actually know anything about much of the Sanders movement, because they already went to war with Pete Buttigieg over that free college proposal. There was the whole, like, why send rich kids to college fight, etc. So it's already been rejected kind of outright. And at the same time, he's going to catch the electoral flack for embracing some of these policies. So I think he's in the worst of both worlds, which is trying to pander to the Sanders movement. The Sanders movement, as far as I can tell, is very clear that they don't expect anything from Joe Biden in terms of the power that he's bringing, in terms of the solutions, whether he would actually fight or prioritize any of the things he's paying lip service to. And then by embracing these things is also setting himself up for being attacked from the right for having it on his policy positions page. So I actually think that from his perspective, because he's not a true economic populist, that he's like a cafeteria populist, right? Like he goes in and finds the little things that might be palatable to the donor class and to the elites here in DC from the so-called populist agenda, and he puts them on his cart, but we know we're not getting the full meal. And I think that is really where his electoral problems lie.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a Pino, a populist in name only. Yeah. I mean, he talks like middle class
Pino, I like
whatever, while he's, selling out middle class people to credit card companies. Yeah. I mean, that's who he is. And so I think really any policy positions that he embraces, any sort of, rhetorical movements towards the left are going to be seen as disingenuous. They're going to be seen as what they are. And to your point, it's all about what do you believe people are actually going to fight for? And the problem for Biden and his team, and I mean, for most liberals, frankly, is they don't actually understand leftists. They don't get the Sanders movement. They don't understand it at all. I mean, the New York Times doesn't understand it. The Biden people don't understand it. The Warren people don't understand it. And so the attempts that they may make to reach out to this group are going to fall flat because they don't really actually get it. I mean, the only thing that I can see that would be taken as sincere, significant, etc., is if you actually pick someone who backed Bernie Sanders and was part of the movement. Now, that would be significant. I don't see them doing that, but that would be significant because that means you're setting yourself up for, okay, and then after I go, then we're going to hand things off to this left-leaning, leftist part of the party, activist part of the party, the young generation of the party. That, and I don't mean that like the VP person has to be a young person. I just mean someone who represents that ideological space on the spectrum. I don't see that happening. I'm not hopeful for that. But that would be the only thing that I would take as a sort of sincere gesture incorporated into his campaign. There was another, though, significant result last night that we should talk about, Saagar, which is that Dan Lipinski, a corporatist, very conservative, one of the most conservative Democrats really left in the House, incumbent in the Chicago area, was defeated by progressive insurgent challenger Marie Newman. Now, look, I mean, turnout was down, and I'm sure she probably benefited from, I think they had a superior organization, more enthusiasm, energy out to get people out. But she was victorious last night, and backed by the Justice Democrats. That is a real win for progressives.
Yeah, it's the first real win that they've chalked up this entire election cycle. I mean, I think we had Marie Newman on the show. I find it pretty interesting, and a lot of people on the right were actually watching this race very closely because we've watched for a long time. Is there anybody who is allowed to be in the Democratic Party at this point who is pro-life? And part of this is the interesting dynamic is the Justice Democrats, and I suspect much of the progressive left backed Marie Newman because Dan Lipinski, like you said, he's a corporatist. He voted against Obamacare. He was on the fundamental economic healthcare issues. He was not there. But Marie Newman actually got a lot of support from establishment Democratic organizations and money because of the pro-life issue. So I'm not sure. I think it might actually be a double-edged sword in terms of the cultural litmus test that has been set here, because the narrative coming out of the race is all about pro-life Democrat loses. I think the corporatist angle on it was gone. And I do think it sends a bad message to people if they want to be in the Democratic Party and don't necessarily align on this one issue. Setting yourself for a one-issue litmus test in a country that is actually 50-50, I don't think that's the right way to go from a majoritarian perspective.
Yeah, well, I'm all for litmus tests on economics. I'm not for this particular litmus test. I think it all, and I write about the narrative that it has come down to, like, especially because Emily's list threw in behind Marie Newman.
Exactly. That's what I'm really talking about.
Marie Newman. So a lot of the sort of like pro-choice establishment backed her in this race. I think it depends a lot on how she governs. Is she more of like an AOC, outsider, bomb thrower, populist, or does she, integrate herself right into the sort of establishment of the party and lean more on those cultural issues? To me, that's what the more enduring, lasting question will be in terms of what this actually means for the Congress, because AOC's election was significant as like a, wow, this is a thing that happened. But what was even more important was the way that she has conducted herself since she's in Congress. So I think that's what's going to be most significant to watch for with Marie Newman.
That's a really
interesting
good point.
Result, though. I'm sure.
Yeah, certainly.
I guess Lipinski is probably wishing now that maybe J.B. Pritzker had pulled the election, as they all should have. I mean, I don't know if you saw any of these pictures coming out yesterday, but polling places randomly closed because election workers didn't show up. People who didn't have hand sanitizer and wipes to wipe down the election machines. People stuffed into small rooms, waiting in long lines, hours and hours. Elderly people, like, it is atrocious that these elections went forward yesterday, and I hope that this never, ever happens again. And I pray to God that the public health impact is minimal. But with this many people who came out in defiance of CDC recommendations, I really fear that, this is going to make the pandemic situation in those states worse.
Yeah, I agree. I want to get out of here as soon as possible. I think everybody else does. And the only way to do it is that we all stay inside for a little while, and it didn't help that case. But all right, we're going to tell everybody what's on our radars, and that is next.